In this session, I wanted to recap some of the work I did off camera, which was to add a couple of GraphQL mutations. So we have a schema here, and I added a mutation section. I don't know if in the last video I described all the, yeah, I think I did. I described the queries. I explained the queries. The mutations can create an entity and delete an entity. And in support of this, I created the create entity and delete entity resolvers. So if we take a look over here, and these mostly just call into the context functions. So because the context function broadcasts, I also need a space just to get the slug. And actually, we probably don't need to make an extra query because I already have the slug. That's the thing I'm passing in. So there's some optimization that can be done with this. Maybe this could be a filter to get the space. I'll add entity with broadcast. Anyway, that can be a to-do. So this will get the space by the slug in order to get a space so that we could pass it into this function here. Space is add entity with broadcast, which we've used before. I modified this function a little bit, space is delete entity with broadcast, to be able to take a filter on. It doesn't have to be the entity ID. It could be the entity ID, or you could pass in the name. So it's filters for the entity. So where are we using add entity with broadcast, I wonder? Add entity with broadcast. So here's the definition, and we're using it in two places: space edit live and also this resolver. Space edit live, yeah, we could easily just pass the slug like this. And the other place is the space resolver, in which case we have the slug, so we could just pass our slug. Then we don't need any of these things. So add entity with the broadcast takes the slug. Oh, no, it needs more than a slug because it actually attaches the space ID to it. So you either pass it in or you make a query in this spot. I see. Okay, I think it's still preferable to pass in a space then. So we'll leave that as is. We'll redo this stuff. So add, okay, that's the definition here. We'll just pass in the space, and back over here in the resolver, we'll undo. Okay, so we get the space by the slug because and then here we'll pass in the space. And the delete entity, same thing. We fetch this, although this one I think we really don't need the ID, right? Yeah, and here we are, maybe we do. We're still using the space ID because we add to filters, and I modified this function to delete an entity. You can pass in filters, so because it uses the get by, so you can pass in an ID, pass in the space ID and a name, And so this relies on passing the space ID and the name that you get from the outside, and then it will get the entity first and then delete it. These are two queries, but then because we want the return value to have the ID, if we were to construct a more efficient query, we have to use delete all, in which case it could match more than one record and it won't return the ID. And I think it's useful for this function to return the ID, at least with GraphQL, so that somebody could have the ID to delete it from a UI or anything like that. That's pretty much it. We can demo this really quickly. So we go to server, and we go to graphical. We now have a root query type that we can get a space for. So we can query a space with a slug, and what do we get back? We want a list of entities. Give me back the name and the type. We got all these entities, and oh yeah, we added data loader. So an entity, it can have components, and components have type and data. So we can get all of these things, and it's actually only making 3 queries behind the scene. So to do that, we added, let's go to the change log. So we added data loader here, and then this is the mutation. We had to add some context and some plugins here, and also load the import the data loader business up here. But then afterwards, entities can use the data loader, components can use the data loader, and it's building up a struct that knows how to make a more efficient query. So you end up making 3 queries, one for the space, one for the entities, and one for the components, and you avoid the n+1 issue. So this is really cool. And let's delete an entity. Let's delete the box here. So we get the name of the box, copy that, and we can do, so if we check the space right now, if we go here, we see that there is a box here. Here's the box. And then if we go to the graphical side, we go to mutation, delete the entity, delete the slug of A, and the entity name of this thing, and that's it. Do that. It's deleted. If we go with the space, it's gone from here, and it's gone from here. All right, made some progress here. Just adding a bit more functionality.